Chair.
I call Stuart Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I find it quite surprising that Mr. Hudson and the Minister and the Chair have stood up and talked about independence in the way they have. Now, I want to clarify, there is a difference between independence and competence. I'm not suggesting that those who are going to be appointed will not be competent, but I am suggesting that they will not be independent. And I point to Clause 6. The Chief Executive must appoint a suitable employee of the Ministry to be the New Zealand Standards Executive. This immediately, the New Zealand Executive is beholden to the CEO. He is an employee of the Ministry. And under the functions of the New Zealand Executive, in 723, it says, in performing functions, the New Zealand Standards Executive must act under the direction of the Minister and the Chief Executive. To me, that does not suggest in any way, shape or form that this isn't an independent position or a person who has been given a mandate to act independently, when it actually states in the legislation that they must act under the direction of the Minister and the Chief Executive. And as mentioned, I'm not saying that this person will be incompetent in any way, shape or form. In fact, they will probably be highly competent. But independent, no, I don't buy that. What I would also like to talk about is the fact that this Chief Executive, that the Standards Executive may in fact delegate authority to anyone within the Ministry as well. Again, that just flies in the face of what constitutes independence. What I would like to talk about briefly, though, is the New Zealand Standards Approval Board. Now, the board is the governance role of this whole process, and section 11 and 12 talks about the functions of the board. But first of all, I want to go to Schedule 1, which is talks about appointment of board members. And the Minister and the Chair said, absolutely there will be experts in this field and therefore there is nothing to worry about. Well, Mr. Chair, in Schedule 1, Clause 1, Part 2, it says, and I quote, the Minister must only appoint a person to be a member of the board who the Minister considers has adequate skills and experience to perform the functions of the board. Now, Mr. Chair, the English language is wide and varied, and there are many words that we can use that describe a person's competency or expertise or experience, and adequate skills is not one of those. To me, Mr. Chair, the term adequate skills does not denote expertise in any way, shape or form. The other thing I would like to say, Mr. Chair, is when we look at the nomination of board members, this is Schedule 1, Clause 2, Part 1, if the Minister considers it appropriate, he or she may invite public or private nominations before appointing a member to the board. So again, I don't know at what point in time or how we quantify what appropriate is, but the other thing this actually says is the Minister may in fact shoulder tap someone and say, come along, I want you to put forward your nomination to be a board member of the Standards Authority. And that is not independent in any way, shape or form, Mr. Chair. I'll go back to the point, it doesn't mean that the person may be incompetent, but if there is a private process where someone has been shoulder tapped by the Minister, I think that flies in the face of what constitutes independence. And if we don't get this right in terms of independence, then all it does is it devalues the work that the Standards Authority and the Standards Board undertakes. Because if there is a perception of cronyism, and I don't use that word lightly, but if there's a perception of cronyism, even if it doesn't exist, then the ability of this board to gain credibility needed will be greatly diminished, and that will be a real shame. The other thing, if I go to Clause 3 in Schedule 1, the Minister appoints or reappoints a member of the board and the chairperson of the board. So again, this isn't independence. This is the Minister determining who is on this board and who is chairing this board, so who has the most powerful position. And the acts of a person as a member or chairperson of the board are valid through and this is another thing that I don't quite get, Mr. Chair, and I'm not too sure where this leads from. Clause 4 in Schedule 1, it actually says that if a person on the board has been elected or nominated through an appointment process which is defect, then they are still able to sit on that board. And I'm not too sure how that comes about, or where, again, the independence or let alone the validity or the mandate. Because the board is a very important part in terms of this whole process. The board has the ability to approve or decline a proposed New Zealand standards, to adopt or decline other standards organisations as standards for New Zealand. to approve or decline modifications to the New Zealand standards, to advise the Minister on any matter referred to the Board, to advise the Minister on the currency of New Zealand standards. I mean, you get the point. What I'm actually saying here is the Board has a very important role to play, Mr Chair.
Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much. The Board has a very important role to play, and yet the legislation says that the Board members only have to have an adequate skills. Now, I'm hoping that what the Minister's going to do is stand up and let me know or give a feel for what adequate skills, or the definition of adequate skills is. And I'll go back to a point that I often make in this House, and that is we are held up in the global marketplace as a country that stands for something, a country that has really robust processes around our standards, around our export quality, etc., etc. If we don't get this right, Mr Chairman, then what we end up with is a devalued brand where people begin to question the efficacy of what we stand for. And that is why this is so important. And the shame of all this is, as Ms Curran alluded to earlier, is we, as a Parliament, we have the mandate, we actually have the responsibility to get this right. And I know in these sorts of circumstances that Labor is always willing to work with the National Government in the Select Committee process to ensure that the processes and the legislation governing such an important area are done in a way that gains credibility not only for our Parliament and our country, but us on the international stage. And it's such a shame that the Government didn't take up this ability, or take up the opportunity for all MPs to work together to get this right. In fact, yesterday I think I spoke on a bill for environmental reporting standards, where again the Labor opposition offered a way through where the Government could work with Labor to come up with something that had a robust and responsible a robust and responsible piece of legislation. And the thing is I actually believe that the people of New Zealand expect us to work together. We are not here to get in the way of the government when we're putting forward this sort of legislation, because we understand how important this legislation is. We're not supporting this because we don't believe that standards are important. We think standards are incredibly important. But we will never support legislation where we think it's not the right thing to do. So, Mr Chair, and the Minister in the Chair, I would like to say that this is a real missed opportunity. Some of the wording in this bill greatly concerns me. When Mr Hudson stood up and said, of course these people are going to act independently, I think that's a little naive, with all due respect, because if you are beholden to the Minister for your appointment, or if you are beholden to the CEO of MB for your appointment, then you are going to undertake the sort of direction that the Minister or the CEO puts on the table and purports to represent. That's the concern I have, and it could have been better, it should have been better, and it's a shame it isn't. Thank you very much.
Mr Chair. Mr Chair.